Hello there, this is Teacher Eduardo, and here I'm recording this video to talk a little bit about learning strategies. Now, learning strategies is this task's main topic, and strategies are quite important in second language acquisition, learning any language, and even we can go as far as to say that learning in general. Learning strategies, or just strategies in general, these are like little tools that you can implement to facilitate the learning process. But here's a caveat. Maybe you're already using strategies, but you just don't know it. The thing or the issue of not knowing or being aware that you're implementing certain strategies takes away a great deal of value of those strategies. So it's almost like you're using a strategy, you don't know about it, so it's almost like it doesn't exist. You need to be aware of the strategy so that you can use it with intent. Now, in this video then, we'll talk a little bit about learning strategies in general, just to get you going with the topic more precisely. So here, let's get going. Now, like I'm already kind of talking here a little bit about strategies, being tools that you need to be aware about. But let's put a brief definition here, somewhat of a generic definition. So a strategy in general, a strategy is a procedure that facilitates a learning task. So this means that you have something that you need to learn. So just to contextualize here in second language acquisition. So you have your students learn, let's say, the past participles, the list of past participle verbs. So you might say to your students, okay, you need to memorize or learn this list of 20 to 30 verbs for past participle. And that's it. That's your instruction. And you probably give it as homework, so that maybe the next day or the next class, they come with the information already in their minds. If they don't have any strategies, they will most likely go to memorization, direct rote memorization, which is to say that they're just going to repeat, as we used to say, repeat like a parrot. I don't know exactly what I'm saying. I don't know what this is for. I don't know how it's being organized in my brain, so that I can retrieve it later in an efficient way. But so I'm just repeating. This is basically a lack of a strategy to facilitate this learning task of learning the 20 to 30 past participle verbs. Say that perhaps you are negotiating the past perfect with your students, and this is somewhat of a challenge, conceptually speaking, especially if they're already more or less proficient with simple past and a little bit of present perfect. Then you kind of go, well, why do I need the past perfect? So conceptually speaking, it's not very close to them as understanding that, like, this is why I need to use it. So if they have no strategy, then they'll just probably randomly look at some exercises, look at some videos, but not really get the meaning of it all so that they can efficiently use it and learn it. So we need a strategy here to facilitate the learning of this specific task, which would be to better understand and implement the past perfect within a real conversation. So strategies are most often conscience and goal driven. So this last part is really, really important. Like I was saying before, you're probably already using a lot of strategies, because this is something that we just naturally do. Our brain kind of puts us into that path of using these little quick techniques and strategies to facilitate things. In other words, if you're doing something and you accidentally say, find a way to do it fast, and you kind of have a little bit of fun, then you're always going to do it that way, because that turns into your strategy of doing that specific thing. So that's it. You're probably not, you may be aware of it to some degree, but what we're talking about here is that you're fully aware. Like, I know what I need to do. I know the steps that I need to do. I know where my emotions need to be, and I need to complete this in, say, a specific time, if in case you're measuring time. So these are some of the characteristics, the general characteristics of what a strategy is. So here one more time: procedure that facilitates a learning task and is conscious and goal driven. The person is conscious of this procedure, of this strategy, and is with a specific goal. I want to achieve something in the fastest and most efficient way, so I'm going to use this very specific set of steps or guidelines to do that. Okay, so we have basically two types of strategies here. So this is kind of broken up into two sections, two big sections. The first section is input strategies, and the second section is output strategies. So input strategies on themselves are divided into three subcategories, which would be, as you have them here on screen, metacognitive, cognitive, and socio-affective strategies. So these are different kind of strategies that we can implement with our students, so it facilitates them receiving information and processing information. This will help them to not just have it in their short-term memory, but to actually convert that into long-term memory. And that is exactly what we want to achieve with these input strategies. So we need to devise not just one, but actually many sort of input strategies to help our students in receiving pretty much all of the language, all of English in this case, even though it's sectioned into classes. So we need to also section our strategies across all of these classes to help our students in achieving the learning process. So again, this is just for the input part, where they are going to receive the language and they have to be conscious and goal-driven. Okay, so metacognitive, cognitive, and socio-affective. These three parts are to do that. And we have a table here. We have a document, a reading document with two different tables, which cover many, many more strategies in these regards. Here, I'm just going to mention some examples just to get you going, so that you have a starting point with each of these. So let's get into the metacognitive strategies. Now, definitions, you're going to see several perhaps here and there. The ones that is going to be in the document, I'm taking this from the document, and you can also search on the web to find additional websites, articles, and videos on exactly what metacognitive strategies are. So let me just go through this quick definition here. It involves planning for learning, thinking about the learning process as it is taking place, monitoring of one's production or comprehension, and evaluating the learning after an activity is completed. So basically, a metacognitive strategy is you becoming aware of how you're learning. That's it. It's the learning on the learning. You know that expression, learning to learn? That refers to metacognitive strategies exactly. So that sort of learning to learn, that means that you're planning, you're setting a plan for learning. You're just not, well, I'm here, teacher, today. I don't know what we're going to do. You tell me what we do, and that's it. So there are no metacognitive strategies going on there. But if you're the student and you go, okay, teacher, so today I know we're going to be talking about shopping. And I already have some questions of things that I want to be able to ask in English. I already have some vocabulary that I know, but these are words in Spanish. I don't know how to say them in English, so I want to get that. And also, I'm thinking about after today's class, I'm going to watch a couple of videos on YouTube, maybe to kind of follow up. And then I'm thinking of also myself doing some worksheet exercises at home. And this is my plan. That's it. So suddenly that student is goal-driven, is conscious, and has a specific plan. That is a metacognitive strategy. Thinking about the learning process. So how do I learn exactly, right? What state of mind do I need to be to actually learn something, not just for today, but for tomorrow and the next day and the next day? Monitoring, checking that I'm actually learning, evaluating, uh, not the formal test that we may give students, but myself say, okay, today we practice shopping. So, okay, so I know we did the practices in the classroom. I've already watched a couple of other videos. Let's see. I'm going to go to the store where I know that they speak English, somewhere here in Tijuana maybe, and I'm going to try and make one question in English and get them to answer in English and see if I understand. And I'm going to go and try and see if it works. There, you're evaluating yourself. You're putting yourself to the test and evaluating and see what's your limit. That again is a metacognitive strategy. So in this sense, all of these things, examples that I'm mentioning, are strategies to help you become aware of how you're learning and how much you know. So here I'm just kind of mentioning from the definition, but additionally, I have some visuals here to take this a little further. So here we have, for example, becoming aware of how you're learning. Say that you give your students a reading and say, okay, so please read it and answer the questions in the book. Well, that's fine because it'll help them to find specific information, perhaps, depending on how the questions from the book are structured. But additionally to that, you can have them create some kind of graphic of this kind to help them find, not just find, but organize the information so that they become aware of what are the components that are that create the context of that reading. Not just finding the specific information, but actually kind of seeing how it's built and becoming aware of that. That is a metacognitive strategy. Or, for example, setting up some kind of, like you have here, like a monitoring of your learning. So say that you're doing some practices and you give your students this worksheet. This is just some random worksheet. And it has these tables and sections where it helps them to become aware of how they're learning, what they're doing to learn. That's a better statement there. It helps them to become aware of what they're doing to learn. So to be proactive in their learning and not just to depend on whatever the teacher says. And we have here another example here. Again, planning to learn. So say that you give this, this is something that you can provide to your students. Say that you give them some kind of table worksheet where it has these columns and you get your students to make their own plan for next class. Okay, so you may tell them, okay, students, so in next class, we're going to be talking about movies, and that's going to be our social topic, and our language topic is going to be future. Okay, I need you to make your plan. What do you want to learn? How are you going to learn it? What are you going to do to learn? So you give them this with the titles that you want them to plan out. So in this very example, quantitative reason, how are you going to communicate? Empirical reasoning, how are you going to experience all of this? How are you going to talk to other people with the social? And what qualities do you need in yourself to actually learn this and integrate it into your language development? So write it down. Whatever you consider is fine. The cool thing about this is there's no wrong answer. Everybody's going to answer different, but it really depends on your personality and your learning preferences or your learning styles. So you know yourself the best. whatever your answer, as long as it's being honest and you're being conscious about it and you have a goal to achieve, then all of your answers are correct. And same is going to be with your students. So these are just some examples of metacognitive strategies, just to kind of get you going here. Again, these are strategies to help you become aware of how you learn. You're not learning anything content-wise. So if you apply these in a language class, in an English class, you're not learning English. You're learning how to learn English. I'll say that one more time. You're learning how to learn English. And that is what these metacognitive strategies are for, to become an efficient learner. Next up, we have cognitive strategies. So say that we have the cognitive strategies up here in your brain, or above your brain, in your mind, let's say, which is learning to learn. Now, the cognitive strategies are dependent on processing inside of your brain now with the actual content. So again, specific learning tasks. So now we're talking about the language, learning the language, actually learning the language now. Direct manipulation. So here we have some examples again. So say that, remember that example I said about getting your students to learn the past participles. So many students are they're gonna see a list of verbs, present, base form, simple past, progressive, past participle, and maybe a column for the Spanish translation. And they're just gonna start repeating and repeating and repeating and repeating, right? And that's not the best way to learn. It's actually quite difficult to learn that way. A strategy, a cognitive strategy, might be to use mnemonics. So here, for example, we have SMILE. That's a mnemonic or an acronym. That's another way. And SMILE stands for something. So you remember SMILE and you remember what each of those letters mean, and that'll get you to remembering whatever it is you need to remember. So you could do like mnemonics of that kind, get the past participles organized in such a way that you can make some mnemonics with some of those verbs, not all of them, but some, or group them up in a specific way so it makes sense. So it helps you to relate one to each other based on their past participle forms. So I mean, there's many ways that you can reorganize them. You'll find that irregular verbs are not really that irregular. There's actually a lot of patterns to them. You just have to learn to find them and see them in the correct way. That's just one example of a cognitive strategy. Another example of a cognitive strategy is doing comparative tables. So you have a list of vocabulary and you just have it random in one column. And then here, say you randomly group. So you kind of start to see some connections between the words. So you start to kind of organize them a little bit. But then in the third column, now it's rationally, now you really thought about it. You logically found the connections between the words. So now you're also counting. So 3 dairy products. It's not just bread, parsley, and like this is kind of like, I kind of see a connection here to the kitchen maybe. But in a more rational way, you can identify milk, cream, and butter as being dairy products. And these are 3 dairy products. So there's a lot of logic in there. Over here, produce, we have 4 produce products: parsley, carrot, tomatoes, beets, and 3 starches: bread, pasta, flour. So this is rationally. And this again is a cognitive strategy to help your students find the connections between vocabulary. And by doing so, in a cognitive strategy way, it helps them to learn more efficiently because they will organize more efficiently in their brains. And when they need to talk in English, they will be faster at doing so, thus learning much faster. Opposed to just going, drive, driving, drove, driven, speak, spoken, speaking, I just kind of messed it up right there. But you don't want to do that. You want to do these sort of exercises. This is a strategy. And in this same manner, we have many, many, many more. As long as you're working directly with the language and using some kind of technique of this way, or a strategy, that would be a cognitive strategy. And lastly, here we have the socio-affective strategies. So basically, the socio-affective strategies have to do with social mediating or interacting with others. They have somewhat of a connection to communicative strategies, which is also something I'm gonna mention here a little later on. But basically, it's just when you're involved in some kind of social activity to exchange and interact information with other people. That's basically it. So, for example, an information gap. So say that you say to everybody, okay, so here I'm going to divide the class into two. This is team A over here, and over here team B. So you give team A worksheet A, you give team B worksheet B, and each one of those has 50% of the information. So now you have to pair up and talk about whatever is on the worksheets so that you can exchange the information and put together, and thus everybody now gets 100% of the information through that social interaction, and you have to fill in the blanks, whatever it may be. That sort of information gap is great. That's a socio-affective strategy. Social, in that I need to talk to other people, and effective, I'm also interacting emotionally because I'm trying to say something and then I get a reaction from you, facial expressions or the sentence I'm expecting to listen to. So that kind of revitalizes my idea that yes, I'm on the right path. So there's an effective buildup going up. Or if I made a mistake or you made a mistake and we kind of don't understand each other, that also is an emotional experience, or there's a bit of tension there, but it's good kind of tension. And we kind of work it out. Maybe we call on the teacher, we fix it, and we move on. So there's a combination of these two things happening, which makes these sort of strategies incredibly important. Okay, we have here another example. So similar to information gap, say that you have some students do some kind of work, it could be on the computer, it could be on a poster, it could be flashcards, whatever, and then you get other people to give them feedback, not you, the teacher. So you say, okay, team A, you go to do these two students, and the two students from team B look at what they did and then give them some feedback. Here's a worksheet to help you with the feedback. So maybe you give them some kind of starter checklist, and then they have to add other options and then give a grade. So there you go. So you get this sort of social and effective exchange is a great strategy to implement the language learning to its full potential and also give them a specific task to do in the meantime. So again, these are just two examples of many, many other strategies that you can come up with or ideate to help and facilitate learning with your students. So those were input strategies. Those were strategies that kind of help you process information. Now, output strategies. Okay, output strategies are basically having to do with language productions. So the last one there, socio-affective ones, I'm also talking about having students produce language. So like I mentioned before, the socio-affective ones have a lot to do with the communication strategies or output strategies. So there's somewhat of an overlap there, but that's fine. The socio-affective strategies, look at them more as building confidence. Strategies to help students build confidence. And the best way to do that is to actually get them to communicate. So the communication part and the confidence building part, they kind of overlap there. One cannot work without the other. So in the output strategies or communication strategies, we have avoidance and compensatory strategies. So these are two big categories. Now, the avoidance strategies, well, just like their name says, it's when the learner doesn't want to talk about something, and usually this is because that specific learner is not proficient enough in the language to talk about whatever it is, the topic it is. So let's say you're talking about going to the movies, and then that specific learner doesn't know a lot of vocabulary about movies. So in this specific case, a strategy that the learner may implement is to avoid talking about the movie, thus changing the topic. So what's going on here is there's a risk that's going on. So you ask your student, so hey, did you see that movie the other day? Or have you been to the movies, and did you see the movie we have now in the movie theater? And then the student kind of maybe doesn't understand your question, or thinks that the answer is far too elaborate, and does not trust him or herself to actually produce what you're expecting. So there's a risk, because now suddenly you're kind of exposing me, and you may expose my weaknesses in how I can speak English or not speak English. So my risk versus trying, my risk is too high. At least as a student, that is what I may feel. So my strategy will be to avoid talking and just saying, I don't know, teacher. That's basically it. So the result is, uh, I mean, your students will perhaps not do exactly what this caricature is doing, but mentally speaking, they are. This is kind of what they're doing when they say, "I don't know, teacher," or they say, "No," or they just be quiet. They'll just be like, "I don't know." So they're just basically avoiding. It's not that they don't want to talk about it. Again, it's perhaps they're internally evaluating that the risk of being exposed, that my weaknesses are exposed, may be too great or too high. And it's a risk I don't want to take, at least not yet. Maybe I don't have the sufficient confidence, or I believe that the language that I would need is beyond what I can actually produce right now. It's too much. So I prefer not to talk about this thing, or not get myself involved. So there's a few strategies to work there. Uh, this is just kind of one example or general example of what's going on here. Now, the other category is the compensatory strategies. So here, where the avoidance strategies, the learner, we may imply or infer that the learner has somewhat of low self-esteem when it comes to producing language or speaking language. In other words, the student doesn't believe he or she can actually speak at the level that we want them to, so they avoid. On this type of strategy, on this category, the learner does have the sufficient confidence. So the learner will participate, the learner will get engaged in the conversation, even though that student or that learner doesn't have sufficient vocabulary, makes grammar mistakes, or just can't articulate some expressions, right? But that's okay. That learner doesn't care. That learner will just try and try and try to converse in English. And that is a really positive thing. So in doing so, they do a lot of strategies to at least get the meaning across in some way. Here are just some examples of doing that. Not all of them, just some of them. One example is to kind of generalize or use these all-in-one vocabulary words. In other words, I have this one word and it means everything, because I don't know the specific words of all of these things. So I'll just use this one universal word to mean it all. For example, stuff. Uh, the other day I went to the movies and I bought the stuff to eat. And you're like, you bought the stuff to eat? So they're not being ambiguous intentionally. What's happening there is they probably don't know the words for popcorn, for soda, for chips, for whatever other things that you may buy at the movie theater. So they kind of just do stuff, right? Yes, the stuff. I bought the stuff in the movies. Or I went to the secondhand store to buy some stuff. What stuff did you buy? Well, the stuff for my house, because maybe they don't know how to say lamp, and they use stuff. So stuff is their universal word for everything. What needs to happen there is just some practice with vocabulary based on these different scenarios, and just get some cognitive strategies to input that information, so that this compensatory strategy is replaced with the actual vocabulary that corresponds. So you need to, as a teacher, you want to start identifying these things in your students, so that, oh, you're doing this sort of compensatory strategy. So that means that you don't have this and this. So for these other input strategies, we need to take this one and this one, work with these so that you can move aside that compensatory and then now reinforce your language production. Compensatory strategies are not a bad thing. They're actually a good thing because it keeps the conversation going. But you don't want to rely on compensatory strategies for your entire life. That's the only thing. Here we have, let me just move myself up here a little bit. Okay. Other sort of strategies here is compensating for information I don't have. So, hold on here. There we go. So, for information I don't have. For example, generally for beginners, we have these questions like, what do you call in English? What do you call this in English, right? Or how do you say, also, how do you say mesa in English? Or can you repeat that, please? Or speak slowly, please. So these are some really important questions, really powerful questions, because it gets students to participate in conversations that are beyond their proficiency level. And this helps them to build confidence a lot to actually participate in those conversations. So these are sort of questions that you want your students to get to learn fast, so that they can participate in many more conversations than they may otherwise not be able to. And also, here's one last example of using expressions to describe something that I don't know the word of. So, for example, instead of saying box, now this is somewhat of a obtuse example, but say it's a cubic containment system, which is a box. So this is a description because I don't remember the name of caja in English, right? So they may be saying, well, so I took my computer and I put it in this brown thing or stuff, and then I put tape on it. You're like, wait, okay, what are you talking about? Can you describe it more? So this other thing, misapplication elimination device, an eraser is what they're talking about. So here we have these other things where we don't remember the word, the name of it. So we describe things around it and we get the other person to tell us the word. That again is a compensatory strategy. It's a really powerful strategy, and also helps to build conversation because I don't know the word, the one word, I need to say many more other words to get that one word. And what that does is it builds confidence, it builds fluency, it builds confidence, and just get your students talking a lot more. So this is a really powerful strategy. And there's many more. These are just some examples just to get your ideas going with what these things are. Right. Let's see. Okay. So input and output strategies. So I think that by now you're starting to get an idea that these sort of strategies are actually essential to learning. If we don't consciously and with a goal implement input and output strategies, then our students will become passive in learning. And they will focus on whatever they feel they need to focus. But it may be random focusing. I focus here today because that's how I feel today. I'll focus over here today because that's how I feel today. And then over and over again. And then they may not see the connection across time. doing these sort of input and output strategies, metacognitive, cognitive, socio-affective, avoidance, compensatory strategies, doing these sort of strategies will help your students be active or proactive in their learning. It'll help them to organize information, a lot of information in their brains. It'll help them to be participative in conversations, in real conversations, and it'll build their confidence and their trust in themselves and in the situation and people around them. So this is why they are so essential to the learning process. In our specific case of English in adults, but if you think about it, it's really the learning process in general, because you can apply this in everything that you learn in life. I think that by now you're getting a good sense that they greatly facilitate learning. Say that you have, like I was saying before, say you have a list of 40 words that you need to learn somehow. You may start by just repeating them. You'll get them in your short-term memory for sure, and you'll be able to repeat them tomorrow's class. And you may even remember them 2 and 3 days from now. But try and remember the complete list of words 2 weeks from now. And not only that, try to remember what those words mean and what is their purpose. That is something you're just not going to achieve by just doing that sort of rote repetition. By implementing input and output strategies, like let's say the table that I showed you here, where you were going from random to initial organization and to rational organization, by doing that, you not just remember what they are, but you know how they're interconnected, what their relationship is, and what they mean, and how you can use them. Just by doing those sort of exercises, it's really, really powerful in that sense, and it greatly facilitates learning, because now I don't need to go, okay, wait, I don't remember the word, wait for it, wait. No, you just get it fast because you learn it fast and you can access information fast. Few learners are aware of implementing strategies. Like I was saying at the beginning, perhaps they already do them. In fact, it's very likely that they do, but it's very unlikely that they are aware of the sort of strategies that they're implementing. And that is a problem, because it's almost like if you're not aware of implementing a strategy, then that means the strategy is like it doesn't exist. So thus you can't really use it as a tool, right? So you need to be aware of the strategy, you need to be conscious about it, and you need to have a goal. You have a purpose. I'm using this specific strategy, or I'm using these 2 or 3 strategies for this specific thing because I want to achieve this in a certain time, right? So that's when they become really powerful. So few learners are aware of them, or most learners are unaware of them. And that is why you as a teacher, you need to guide your students in using and in becoming aware of the strategies, and then in using them efficiently, input and output strategies. So this is to say that when you build your lesson plan, say you open up your student book for this week's class and you build your lesson plan, it's not just about the content. It's not just about explaining the grammar. It's not just about getting students to repeat something. It's also about helping students to become efficient learners. So you need to think about the content. Okay, this specific, let's say, listening activity. I know that my students are not that great for listening. Okay, great. That's okay. So where do I need to put them so that they become good listeners? Well, first, I think I'm going to implement a metacognitive strategy first to help them become aware of their own strengths and weaknesses. And we're not learning any English yet. It's just learning about yourself and what you need to do to be a good learner. I'll do this quick worksheet to get them to reflect a little bit. Okay, once they're there, I'll prep the listening, and then we'll do the listening. We'll complete the exercise in the book. And then after that, I'll get them to extract some of those expressions, and we're going to do a diagram so that they can find the relationships. And that diagram is a cognitive strategy. And then from there, Let's say we're going to do a conversation and we're going to do an information gap. And I'll do these other two worksheets so that they can work that information gap, and those worksheets are social affective strategies. So notice that just for one exercise, I'm implementing three strategies. Right there, I'm just working with the input, but we can find a way to work also the output strategies as well. So doing a lesson plan is not just about preparing the class, or more so, preparing the class is not just about the language, it's about helping your students become efficient learners. And to do so, we use strategies, input strategies and output strategies. So yes, make these strategies part of your lesson plan. Don't do your lesson plan and then get your strategies here on another sheet of paper. No, you want to intertwine those two things, so they have to be the same thing. Or one little technique that I developed, or that I use a lot, is I like to name my strategies. So say that if we're doing this diagram for organizing, and the diagram is movie theater vocabulary, so I'll just write it popcorn diagram, and that kind of helps me. I already know what that strategy is, so I give these personalized names to my strategies that I build. Usually they're content dependent, even though they're general strategies. But in that way, when I build my lesson plan, I'll go, maybe that metacognitive strategy of learning how to be a good listener is a good listener's strategy. So I'll just write good listener strategy, and I already know all the steps for that. So I need to do this. So that good listener strategy is this, these other 4 steps that we need to follow. And that diagram, the popcorn diagram, oh, I already know what that is. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 additional steps. But in my lesson plan, I just write popcorn strategy. So in that way, my lesson plans are not these very long documents, but they're kind of coded because they have the names of my strategies, and I already know what that is. Maybe that strategy, the popcorn strategy, I have it in another document where I explain it in full, and I have all of the instructions to do the popcorn diagram. So that way, if I don't remember, okay, what was the complete activity for popcorn? I go to my popcorn diagram instruction sheet, and there is everything that I need. Oh, okay, got it. And the best thing about this thing, if you're using a laptop, if you're using your phone, you can create links between your documents. So you just have a link, tap it or press it. It takes you to that document so you can review the strategy. Okay, great, got it. And you return to your lesson plan in just 2 clicks or in a second or so. So if you integrate technology into this, it really helps you to have all of these resources and strategies around your lesson plans. And that also makes you become a really efficient and great teacher for your students. And there you go. So those are this is the overview video for learning strategies. So hopefully by watching this video, it gives you a better understanding of what strategies are, how we organize them, and more importantly, the value of integrating strategies into your teaching practice. It's basically tools. It's learning tools that you give to your students to help them be better students, to help them be better learners, and just to help them be better in general. Because right now, we may be using these strategies, these learning strategies, metacognitive, cognitive, socioaffective, avoidance, and compensatory, for learning English. But again, if you think about it, these strategies, you can use them with anything and with everything that is going on with your life, with talking to other people in Spanish, with learning about mathematics, with learning about quantum physics, I don't know, with learning or with planning a trip. You can use strategies to plan a trip. Because planning a trip involves several steps, several sections of things that need to happen, and each of those sections can have strategies that you implement. You know, for uh, for getting everybody organized and on the same page of where you're going, for looking for the information of where you're going, hotels, reservations, transportation, food, right? For preparing clothes and luggage. So there's many steps to actually planning a trip, and you can implement a diversity of strategies in doing that. And that's in Spanish and English and German and French and whatever, right? So it's just strategies in general. Okay, so there it is. There's a video. Be sure to check the complementary documentation on strategies that we have in this task, the readings and the tables, and the exercises that we have so that you are ready to build your own strategies, most importantly, based on content that you have to work with your students. Okay, so there you go. Catch you next time.